Now at the Home Depot, save up to 35% off appliance special buys, like the Samsung stainless steel side-by-side refrigerator, just $9.98. You save $300. It's big enough to hold 25 bags of groceries. Unload those, and if that makes you thirsty, you'll really love the external ice maker and water dispenser. Today is the day for doing. Spring Black Friday savings now at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing. U.S. only while supplies last. See store for details. Valid through April 17th.
Welcome to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption and infertility. Today we're going to do something a little different. Today is going to be an Adoption 101. I am going to be the only guest. It's going to be a repeat of presentations I make around the country on this topic. And I'm going to do it for you today. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Here's a sample of what you're going to hear. We have domestic infant adoption. We have adopting from foster care, also sometimes foster care adoption. We have international adoption. Then we also have one that I want to talk about that is actually not technically a form of adoption. It's embryo donation. It is sometimes called embryo adoption, and it's also non-genetic parenting, so I think it fits well within an Adoption 101 course, but I point out that it technically is not a form of adoption. I'm Dawn Davenport. I'm the director of Creating a Family. We are the National Adoption and Infertility Education and Support nonprofit. We hang out online at creatingafamily.org. One of the things we do and one of the things that we are most proud of is our Adopt Ed for Parents Center. In that center, we have 100-some-odd courses, 1-hour courses, and with certificates of completion, educating you on every topic you have any interest in knowing about in the field of adoption. That's in a rather braggadocious way of saying it, but the truth is, with 100-some-odd courses, we do cover soup to nuts. Including topics that would be of direct interest to people who are interested at the very beginning of their journey, who are interested in the topic of this show. So check it out at our website. You go to creatingafamily.org, hover over, just click on online education, or hover over online courses and click on for parents. We also have courses for social workers, which accredited for CE, as well as infertility nurses. But you could click on the parent one, and you'll find all the courses listed there. I think you'll really find them, the diversity, interesting. The Creating a Family radio show is underwritten by Jockey Being Family Foundation. Their mission is to strengthen adoptive families through post-adoption services. As their founder, Deborah Waller, said, one failed adoption is one too many. You can support their mission by buying an adorable little bear or a cozy blanket at their website, jockeybeingfamily.com. You can also learn more about them there, and we thank them for their support. This show, as well as all the resources provided by Creating a Family, could not happen without the generous support of our partners who believe in our mission of providing unbiased education and support to those struggling to create a family. Some of our wonderful gold sponsors include Vista Del Mar. They are a licensed and accredited nonprofit adoption agency with over 65 years of experience helping to create families. They have 3 adoption programs, a private infant program, an international program, and an adoption through foster care program. You can connect with them by going to our website, hovering over the word adoption, and click on Find a Professional. And they will be right there. We also have other sponsors whose generosity allows us to bring you this show. We ask that when choosing an adoption service provider, please consider choosing one from the Creating a Family directories, which you can find on the service provider page of our site. You can search by location, services provided, number of years in operation, just a host of factors that we think are important when choosing. And by using these directories, you support those who support us. And we thank you. Welcome to Creating a Family's Introduction to Adoption. keep in mind that as the National Adoption Education and Support Nonprofit, we have lots more detailed information on all the options you're going to hear about today in our Adoption A to Z resource guide. You can find that guide at our website, creatingafamily.org. Hover over the word adoption and click on A to Z resources. There's actually a lot of different ways that you can find that, but that's one of them. We have extensive resources on everything you're going to hear us discuss today. So if you have additional information, which I'm sure you will, please make sure you check out our A to Z resource guide. All right, I think we have to start with the basics, which are there are 3 basic types of information. There's actually, I'm going to tell you about 4, so I don't know when to call that, 3.5. We have domestic infant adoption. We have adopting from foster care, also sometimes foster care adoption. We have international adoption. Then we also have one that I want to talk about that is actually not technically a form of adoption. It's embryo donation. It is sometimes called embryo adoption, and it's also non-genetic parenting, so I think it fits well within an Adoption 101 course, but I point out that it technically is not a form of adoption. We'll talk about that one later. All right, let's start with domestic infant adoption. Interestingly enough, it's hard to know exactly how many infant adoptions take place in the United States. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. But it's true because there's not one source that is keeping track. However, there's some good estimates out there. And so somewhere in the neighborhood of 18,000 plus, probably a little less than 18,500. So somewhere in that range is the number of infant adoptions. It's interesting to note, and this is down from the 1960s and 70s when there were more, only 0.5% of all live births in the U.S. are placed for adoption. And you would assume that would be more with single parents. However, only 1.1% of births to single parents are placed for adoption. So that's just kind of to put things in perspective. The process for domestic infant adoption it varies a little. First, it is, for the most part now, a birth parent or an expectant parent selection process. Where the expectant parent or birth parent, and just a brief word about language, we have shifted in the last 10 years. We no longer call pregnant parents, pregnant women and partners, birth parents. It puts some pressure, unnecessary and unneeded and perhaps unethical pressure on the expectant parent to place by calling them a birth parent. It assumes an end that has not happened yet. So what we recommend is we call them expectant parents before birth, and after birth and after placement after birth they're called parents, and then after placement they're called birth parents. We don't get real tripped up on language here at Creating a Family, but if you're hanging out online very much or even just talking to people, it's always good to know some of the landmines, linguistic landmines that exist, and that's potentially one of them and an important one. All right, so the expectant parents choose the adoptive parents they want to raise their child. Now, one of the confusing things is that each state in the United States has different adoption laws, and they can differ pretty significantly. So it's important that you know the laws in your state. You can work with either an adoption agency or an adoption attorney to adopt a child domestically, an infant. Domestic infant adoption is almost always the placement, the relinquishment by the parents shortly after birth, depending on the state, depends on the time. So it's almost all infant adoptions. Most states, different states allow attorneys to play different roles. Some states do not allow attorneys to match expectant parents with adoptive families. In other states, they can, and in fact they can function and do function oftentimes almost the equivalent as an adoption agency. It is possible to apply to more than one adoption agency or attorney if it is allowed by the contract, and if you sign a contract, you need to check the contract to see if it is allowed, and if you can afford it. Obviously, it's going to cost you more money. Creating a Family has a really good resource. It's a multimedia guide on how to choose an adoption agency or an adoption attorney. It is a terrific resource. It's I don't know the exact number of pages, but it's over 50 pages, and it's got lists of questions. It's got comparison charts. It helps you compare cost, which is something it's really difficult to do, to make sure you're comparing apples and oranges. We have interviewed parents about their experience. It's just a really great resource. You can find it by going to our website, creatingafamily.org, hovering over the word resources, and click on eGuide, and it will be right there. One of the first things you have to do when you go to an agency or an attorney is have a home study performed. What is specifically required in the home study is controlled by state law, and also if you're adopting internationally, it's controlled by both the State Department in the U.S. as well as the government of the country that you are receiving from. But right now we're talking about domestic infants, so that's not relevant. But even with domestic infant, different states can require different things. But generally speaking, they're similar. And it's supposed to be a home study. It's supposed to be both an evaluation of you as potential parents, as well as an education of you as potential parents. And so it's both. They go hand in glove, I guess would be the saying. So you want to. They're going to be evaluating, but they're also going to be educating. It is possible to adopt interstate. In fact, it's fairly common. It increases the cost, as you would imagine. And there are some distinctions. One, if the child is born in another state, you will end up generally having to spend some amount of time in that state after birth, while the interstate compact procedures are being followed that allows you to travel back home with your child. But it is definitely possible, and you can apply to agencies in other states. We cover this pretty thoroughly in the multimedia guide, How to Choose an Adoption Agency or Attorney, but it can be done, and so if that's what you're thinking, you should absolutely consider it. There are advantages, and we talk about that too in the guide, to using a local agency. But if you're interested in increasing your odds, sometimes going out of state is necessary. Most adoptions in the United States, domestic infant adoptions in the United States, over 95%, have some degree of openness. Now, the big question that most would-be adoptive parents say, and as well as expectant parents, is what do we mean by open? And that's a great question, because that term is not, as we say in the law, is not a defined term, which means it's open to interpretation. It's also open to negotiation between the expectant parents and the adoptive parents. And that is something that you want to give some thought to. What we see here at Creating a Family is that most often adoptive parents have a knee-jerk reaction that no, they don't want an open adoption. There seems to be a fair amount of confusion in what we mean by open, and the assumption that open means co-parenting. Open adoptions can mean many things, but they are not co-parenting. The degree of openness and the form that the openness takes is entirely up to the two families involved. We have a lot of information on open adoption. There's been a fair amount of research, and the research is pretty clear that open adoption is good for kids. Interestingly enough, it also turns out to be good for adoptive families, but ultimately we're trying to think of what's in the best interest of kids. So I strongly encourage you to become educated on openness. We have in the Adopt Ed Center for Parents a number of courses, quite a few, in fact, exploring what we mean by open adoption, how to do it well. so I refer you to that topic or to those courses. And before you automatically say no or say that you want a very limited degree of openness, get educated on what it means so you can make an educated choice. All right, so what are some of the risk factors that adoptive parents face when they're trying to decide whether to accept a match? The way that the process usually works is adoptive parents prepare a profile. It's called different things, but it's information that they want the expectant parents to know about themselves. These profiles, after the home study is made, adoptive parents do make up a profile, or it could be sometimes called, it used to be called a Dear Birth Mother book or pamphlet. It's more often not called that now. And in the profile, you put information about yourself. You're trying to introduce yourself to the expectant family. The expectant mom, and if the father's involved, the expectant couple, look through these profiles and generally select an adoptive family to be matched with. And then the adoption agency, or perhaps, depending on the state, the adoption attorney, if you're working with one, can facilitate the match between the adoptive parents and the expectant parents. After the match, it's up to the parents as well, to a certain extent, with the agencies, what they do. But very often, phone calls are exchanged, in-person meetings happen, text, emails, letters, whatever, as a way of continuing to get to know each other. So because you're forming a lifelong relationship of sorts. So that is, and during that period of time, once the adoptive parents have been matched with a expectant family or expectant mom, the adoptive parents have to make a decision on whether they want to accept that match. Some of the issues that adoptive parents face, and some of the harder issues they may face, some of the risks they may face, one is prenatal exposure. The prenatal exposure can be to alcohol or drugs, either legal or illegal drugs. And that's something that adoptive parents need to get educated on, because the impacts can be both short-term, where the infant is going through withdrawal, but there can also be long-term impacts of having been exposed to alcohol and drugs in utero. Again, Creating a Family has a lot of courses on this topic, a whole lot of courses on this topic. And I would strongly recommend that you take a few of those courses to learn more about the short and long-term impacts of prenatal exposure. Another risk factor that parents, would-be adoptive parents face, there are other risks, but these are the ones I'm listing are the ones that tend to cause more pause. And that second one would be mental health issues in the birth family. Again, there are some mental health issues are heritable and some are not, or just have a low degree of heritability. And it behooves you to find out about that before you make any decisions. In addition to courses in our Adopt Ed Center for Parents, we also have resources on our website in the A to Z resource guide on genetics and some fascinating research on how heritable different mental illnesses are. And so what the risk is if it's a grandparent. What's the risk if you have if the mom or the dad has a specific mental illness? Another risk factor is what we call legal risk. Almost always that involves an unknown or an unnamed birth father, or in this case it would be a father since it's pre-adoption. That does pose a legal risk, and there are specific, each state has specific laws on how that must be handled. Your agency or your adoption attorney, depending on which one you're working with, will be able to guide you. But you need to go in knowing that it is a risk factor, and you need to understand what that risk is. also talk with your agency or your attorney, and they will absolutely be able to tell you what the process is. But, one of the things that worries me is when we talk about risk factors such as the ones I've mentioned, I do believe that there's a myth out there that adopted kids are all damaged goods, and there is nothing that could be further from the truth. Both research supports that, and anecdotally, I can tell you a million stories, including my own, that where adopted kids are thriving. So do fight that in your head. If that's something that you are struggling with, just that basic idea that adopted kids are going to have all these problems, you need to spend some time learning more. There's lots of places to do that, but the Creating a Family website is a great one, creatingafamily.org. All right, transracial adoptions are also increasing in the U.S., and generally when we talk about them, we're referring to white adoptive parents adopting infants of color, but it can go the other way, and so it's important to note that. It's hard to find statistics, as with everything in domestic infant adoption. It's hard to get good statistics. The only statistic we have been able to find, it says 21% of domestic infant adoptions are transracial. I believe that is outdated. I think if we were looking in the last 5 years, it would be significantly more. But I, again, haven't been able to find the statistics. Suffice it to say that transracial adoptions are very common now. There is, generally speaking, shorter waits associated with a willingness to adopt full African American boys. That actually introduces a kind of an interesting fact that a lot of people don't know about, and that is gender selection. It may or may not be, depending on your agency, possible, and depending on whether the expectant mom knows the gender of the child. It may be possible to select the gender, but upwards of 80% of adoptive parents, excuse me, let me grab some tea here. Upwards of 80% of adoptive parents, if given a choice, prefer to adopt girls. If you're curious about that, which I have just been fascinated by that stat, we have a blog on it, and you can go to our website where we analyze the reasons for this. The blog's title is Snips and Snails, and gender preferences in adoption. So just type in Snips and Snails in the search box on our website, or just type Snips and Snails, Creating a Family in Google, and you'll find it. If you're interested in that, it's fascinating. So if you are open to adopting a boy, and especially if you are open to adopting a full African American boy, generally speaking, you will see a shorter wait. However, before you go into transracial adoptions, we caution people to say, don't go into transracial adoption simply because it is the fastest way to get a baby. When you adopt a child of a different race, your whole family becomes a transracial family. And you need to know what that means for you as a family. You also need to learn how you can best parent a child who is not of the same ethnicity and race that you are. And that can mean some changes in different types of parenting. And so we really want you to slow down and do some research about what it means to become to adopt transracially, and how you need to go about doing that in order to best prepare your child. Because remember, children are not in, I always call it the footy pajama stage. Kids don't stay in that footy pajama stage very long, and pretty soon they become teens of that race and then adults of that race. And your real goal in parenting is to raise a fully functioning, healthy, happy adult. So you need to learn what that means if you don't share the same race as your child. Again, we have lots of resources to help you on that. In the A to C Resource Guide, we have an entire section on transracial adoption. We also have many courses in the Adopted Center for Parents, so you can go to either place. For domestic infant adoption, cost, that's one of the biggest questions we have. I'm going to give you the averages, but I'm also going to tell you to be wary of averages, okay? The average cost, and hold on to your hat because these are going to blow you away. The average cost for an agency adoption, for a domestic infant adoption, is $42,000. Now, keep in mind that's going to change. So by the time you're listening, this may or may not. It may be different. But I think you can easily say it's upwards of, the average would be upwards of $40,000. The average for an attorney, the last year I looked was $32,000. Again, that's going to change over time. So, but you need to know that it's upwards of $30,000. So we're going to talk in averages here. And one of the reasons you need to be really cautious of averages is that it makes a huge difference. You can have some at the much lower end of the scale and the much higher end. I guess really the median is what we actually need to know here, and that data is not available. There are a number of things that affect costs. One of the first things that affect cost, and this is often a distinction between the agencies and attorneys, and that is what services are included in the cost. One of the things we're very careful to do in our multimedia guide, the How to Choose an Adoption Agency or Attorney, is try to help you compare costs by, as I said earlier, compare apples to apples. Because if something is not included in the base but you have to pay extra, that changes. You may not pay it up front in the initial fee, but you're still paying it. Some of the services that you absolutely want to have included, first and foremost, is good pre-placement counseling for the expectant mom, and ideally have this counseling be able to continue post-adoption for her. And that's a distinction you sometimes see about what is provided by attorneys and what's provided by agencies. Agencies tend to be full service and attorneys tend to be more a la carte, so something to note. Another service that changes that you pay for is whether you find the expectant mom on your own or whether the agency or the attorney, if allowed in that state, finds the expectant mom. Almost always it is less expensive if you find the expectant parents and bring that to the agency or to the attorney. Another thing that changes, and this varies greatly, what you should expect on paying is what amount of expectant mom expenses you pay. Each state has different laws on what you are allowed to pay. And also it matters when in the pregnancy you are matched. If you are matched, obviously, earlier in the pregnancy, and for instance, your state allows you to pay housing costs, you're going to incur a greater cost than if you are being placed in the 8th month of pregnancy. It also matters how the agency or attorney handles expectant mom expenses. Some, and this used to be more common than it is now, have each adoptive family is not expected to pay the expectant mom that has matched with them. The expectant mom cost comes out of a common pool that is used to pay, and that's still the case in a number of agencies. But it seems to me that more agencies, or at least a number of agencies, have moved to each adoptive family pays the expectant mom expenses of the mom that they are matched with. So that can make your cost vary considerably. And that's something that you want to know. You want to ask that question. Another question you want to ask is, what happens if the expectant mom changes her mind after birth and decides not to place? You are out that money, although some agencies work out some way of comping you for the money. So that's just questions you need to ask. And that leads to the failed matches and who pays. It is not uncommon for moms who make an adoption plan while they are pregnant to change their mind after birth. We have a resource that actually a guide that we've done that's where an extensive look at failed matches, including risk factors, how often they happen, how much money people have lost, and things like that. You can find that by Googling on our website, Failed Adoption Matches. I strongly recommend that. It's a great resource, and it's free. One of the things you want to know is what happens with both your agency fee or attorney fees that you've paid up to that point. If the adoption fails, do you get any of that money back? Again, another significant factor that would influence the cost that you're paying. Another factor that influences cost is how many agencies and attorneys you apply to and what their upfront fees are. You may be able to get a match sooner if you apply to more than one, but your costs are going to increase. And obviously, if you are adopting out of state, you will incur travel costs, and that too will impact how much you pay. Keep in mind when we're talking about cost that there is an adoption tax credit. At least as of 2017, there is an adoption tax credit. It is available for all types of adoption except for embryo donation, which I mentioned really isn't a form of adoption. The amount varies. It's adjusted each year. It's $13,000 plus change right now, and it will continue to adjust each year. Creating a Family has an adoption tax credit headquarters on our website, creatingafamily.org. And each year, usually in January, we do a Creating a Family radio show on that year's adoption tax credit. And if you have adopted or you are thinking about adopting in the next year or two, you really do need to listen to that show. So go to our A to Z resource guide, click on Adoption Tax Credit. It has its own section, its own little headquarters, and you will find the latest show as well as lots of other information on that. All right, one of the most common questions we get about any form of adoption, and right now we're talking about a domestic infant, and that is timing. How soon can I get a baby? Again, we have to talk kind of averages. That's all we can do. About 65% of adoptive parents match with an expectant mom within 1 year. 84% match within 2 years. The factors that affect timing are the adoptive parent's openness to children of a different race, openness to prenatal exposure, openness to mental health issues in the birth family, and sadly but true, how much they can afford to pay, because there are some adoption situations which are going in, agencies and attorneys know are going to be more expensive for a variety of reasons, and or the ability to apply more often or to hire an adoption consultant to help you find an expectant mom. So all of those are help you find a match in an agency. So all of those increase costs, and if you have the ability to pay, that affects the timing on when you will get a match. There is a resource we have on our website called 5 Reasons You Are Not Getting an Adoption Match, where we explore the reasons and talk about them in detail. Just Google that. It's a free resource. Google it on our site, and that will pop up. All right, moving on to talk about adopting from foster care. Let's start with the numbers. I said with a domestic infant, we knew so little. Well, the truth is, with foster care, we know a lot by numbers because it is something that is tracked. Obviously, it changes year by year, so you can't hold these numbers forever. But generally speaking, roughly, there's about 40,000 plus kids in foster care. Of those, upwards of 100,000 have already had their parental rights terminated and are waiting for adoption. Upwards of 50,000, somewhere in the 54, 55, somewhere that type of range, are adopted. Children are adopted each year from foster care. And sadly, every year more than 20,000 kids age out when they turn 18 without ever having found a family. The process for adopting from foster care, and keep in mind that the process for each of the type of adoptions we're talking about, and the type of adoptions are domestic infant, foster care adoption, international, and embryo donation. The process is distinctly different for each type. All right, the process for adopting from foster care. The first thing you need to know about the process is the goal of the foster care system is reunification. The goal is to heal the birth family so that the children can go back home to their families. And in fact, 51% of the children who enter foster care do reunify with their families. 22% of the children who enter foster care eventually are adopted. There are two general ways to adopt from foster care. One is that you can adopt a child that is legally free. Remember, I said there was 100,000 plus children who are currently waiting for an adoptive family. The second way is called different things in different states, but generally it's called foster to adopt. You qualify as a foster family. The child is placed with you as a foster child. And if the child becomes available for adoption, almost always the foster family is given the first choice after, obviously, the extended family. So the first goal is to reunify the child. The second goal is to look for members of the extended family who might want to take guardianship or adoption of this child. But if not, usually it is the foster parents who are given the first choice to adopt this child. Generally speaking, we see that younger children are almost always placed first as foster and then are adopted by, if they are not reunified or adopted by extended family, are adopted by their foster family. So when people say, I would like a relatively young child from foster care, what they are almost always saying is they want to go in as a foster parent and in through the foster to adopt program. What is crucial here is for you to understand that your role when you enter this foster to adopt program, your role is to first help with reunification. I have not been able to find statistics or research that says how often the people are able to adopt, but I can tell you that most families tell me that, yes, they are able to adopt from foster care by working through the foster to adopt program. However, it is very often not the first child or sibling group that's been placed with them. So you need to go in knowing that the child that you are first placed with may not be your forever child, that child is meant to go back to his or her birth family. So there's a risk associated with that program. When adopting from foster care, depending on the state, you usually have the option of working directly with the county agency, whatever it's called, Department of Family Services, Department of Social Services, whatever it's called, and every state calls it something different. You can work directly with that agency, or you can work with a private agency that has a contract with the state to place foster children. Not every state has a contract with contracts with private agencies, but many do. And then each state treats differently with the type of children they make available to the private agencies. Some only give the very hardest to place children, the older children or the children with significant special needs, to the private agencies, and other states do just the opposite. They give them the county agency focuses on the harder to place children, and the private agencies have the easier, the younger children, the children with less diagnosed special needs, things like that, smaller sibling groups or singletons, things like that. So you're going to have to check. The way to find out the information of which private agencies is you can go to the Child Welfare Information Gateway, and on there is you can find out the contact information for the foster care for each state, and you can just call them or look on there. The websites are also listed there. You can check on the website, and a list of agencies will be listed, and then just call them and ask. Call the one closest to you and say, do you place foster children, or do you place children that are legally free to adopt from foster care? And if so, we're thinking we want a child in this age range or whatever, and see if what they tell you. That's the easiest way. Again, as with domestic infant, there is a home study. It is a different home study that is done. They are not necessarily, you cannot use one for the other very often, but a different home study is done for foster care. And with foster care, there is the state specifies an educational course you have to go through. It's different states use different courses. It's usually in the range of about 30 hours, and you have to go through this course in order to qualify, in order to adopt or foster to adopt from foster care, or just foster in general. And again, you can get information about that from your state. The two most commonly used ones are MAP, M-A-P-P, and PRIDE, P-R-I-D-E. Those are acronyms for much longer things, but they go by MAP or PRIDE. It is a question we get very often is, can I adopt a child from foster care from another state? And in particular, people will go onto websites like Adopt U.S. Kids, and which is a great website, by the way, for you to go to. And they will see a child and they want to know, that child is in Arizona and I'm in Florida, can I adopt that child? The answer is yes, but you can tell by the way I'm prefacing this that there's going to be a but. And there is. Yes, but it is harder to adopt through foster care when you go interstate. And that's for a lot of practical reasons. Number one, states, social workers, caseworkers prefer to place a child so that they can keep checking up and provide resources after the fact or whatever. And also for doing the home study, doing the education and all of that, it's easier to work with a family. Also, oftentimes, these children will have siblings or extended family members that they want to, the social worker believes it's in the child's best interest to keep track of, to keep in touch with. That's also easier. And quite frankly, it's just more expensive for the states to place a child out of state. So, yes, the answer is you can do it, but anecdotally, we hear frequently from people who have tried it that there are a lot of roadblocks. That is not to say that you should not try it. We have a large online support group, a Facebook support group, and there was a family who adopted a sibling group of, I think, 4. They lived in Alaska, and the children were in Florida, and they were absolutely able. It probably helped that it was a larger sibling group because Florida had not been able to find a placement locally. So the harder the child to place, or the children to place, the more likely you're going to be able to adopt interstate. All right, hang on just 1 minute. What children are available? Well, all types of kids are available. The age of the kids, all ages, but infants generally are not readily available and almost always enter the home as a foster child with the intent for family reunification. So that's important to remember. Nationwide, between 7,000 and 8,000 kids are adopted each year under the age of 2, and somewhere in the range of 15,000 are under the age of 3. Almost all of these kiddos were adopted by their foster family or extended biological family. The greatest need is for children 5 and older and sibling groups. And there is a huge need in all states for families willing to foster and to adopt these kiddos. The majority of children are, well, not the majority, let's say about 48, close to 50% of the kids in foster care are white. About 18% are close to 20, let's say, are black, and somewhere in the 20 range are Hispanic. And somewhere about a third or a little less than a third of the adoptions from foster care are transracial. You can specify a race of your child. You can also specify the gender. When I say specify, the child that you would like to adopt. You can specify. You can also specify the gender. It's evenly split between boys and girls, and lots of siblings. And there's usually a shorter wait for families willing to accept siblings. And most states and most social workers do their best to try to keep siblings together. So that's hence why there is a need for families who are able. Openness is takes on a different form oftentimes with foster care adoption. First, very often the openness involves contact or just providing information to extended family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Or with children, especially with larger sibling groups, they do have to split them up on occasion, and more often than they would like. And then there is sometimes a desire, often a desire to keep children in contact with their siblings, whether they're in foster or in another adoptive home. So that's how openness often. However, openness can also involve birth families. Again, it usually takes on a different form, and it has a lot to do with why the child has been removed. Risk factors for adopting from foster care. Abuse and neglect is not an insignificant in the least. A national study of children and youth in the child welfare system found that more than 70% had experienced chronic or repeated trauma. And quite frankly, 100% of the kids have experienced neglect unless they were removed at the hospital. So that's just something that, and abuse and neglect leaves its mark, and it does require a different type of parenting. Another risk factor is multiple placements within foster care. We would so like not to see children be bounced from foster home to foster home, but it does still happen. And with each bounce, it just cuts into a child, and it hurts, and it leaves its scar, and so that's real as well. Prenatal exposure. We have been told by experts on the Creating a Family radio show that the majority of children they see in foster care have had some form of prenatal exposure. It's something to go in with your eyes wide open. And most adoptions from foster care are considered special need on some level. The abuse and neglect would qualify a child for special needs. Prenatal exposure would qualify a child. Being in a large sibling group, things like that. So most of them are considered. The cost for adopting from foster care is very little. In fact, it's usually free, and once the adoption tax credit is applied, it is totally free. And in fact, the vast majority of people who adopt from foster care receive an ongoing monthly adoption subsidy, and very often the children continue to be qualified for Medicaid, and some states pay college tuitions and state college tuitions and things like that. Timing. Well, the timing, as we talked about with domestic infants, somewhat depends on the openness to risk factors, the age of the child and sibling groups, things like that. About 60% are matched within 1 year, 75% matched within 2 years. So the timing, again, varies, and also varies whether you're adopting a legally free child or a child that's not legally free and you're simply fostering. All right, we've talked about two of the major types, domestic infant and foster care adoption. Now we're moving on to talking about international adoptions. International adoptions have seen a significant decrease since the mid-2000s. You can look up the latest year's statistics, but it's now, between 5,000 and 6,000, and down from 23,000 in the mid-2000s. The process is for adopting internationally. We generally recommend choosing a country first. Creating a Family has a terrific resource, a free resource. It's country comparison charts. We have taken the 17, I think it is, top placing countries to the U.S., and we analyze each of them so you can compare on 25 factors that we think are important when choosing a country. Things like cost, the type of child available, restrictions on the parents, things like that, how much travel, this whole, like I said, 25 different factors. And so you can find that under the international adoption page of our website. We link directly to the comparison charts, and you can take a look at that. Once you choose a country, you can choose an agency that places a child from that country. Most often you are not going to be working with an agency nearby. It is possible depending on where you live, obviously. And if you live really close to an agency and you are open to any country and any country might be open to you, you can always reverse it and go to the agency first. But very often that isn't the case. So then you can choose an agency that places with a child from that country, and then review our multimedia guide on choosing an adoption agency to help you pick the right agency, because not all agencies are created equal. It's also possible to choose a waiting child. Creating a Family has a waiting child center, and there's also another website called Rainbow Kids, which has waiting children internationally. So you can go on either of those, and on ours you would get to it by creatingafamily.org, hover over the word adoption and click on waiting children. And you can go and look at the kids that are listed there, and then the agencies are also listed there, as well as just a link. So you click on the link, and you can send an email to the child's social worker expressing an interest, and you can get a lot more information on the child and then start the process. Again, as with the other forms of adoption, a home study is required. With the home study, again, it is varies, but varies by country, not by state so much. Each country says what they're looking for in an adoptive family for the children from that country, as well as the State Department has certain requirements. So you will need to find out, your agency will guide you on this case. And will tell you what needs to be done, and we'll do the home study. Again, it should be a combination of evaluating you as well as educating you. And in fact, the State Department requires at a minimum 10 hours of education, and in my opinion, that's a bare minimum. And as I said before, it is certainly possible to adopt across state lines. In fact, it's very common. Risk factors with international adoption. Most international adoptions now are considered special needs adoptions. The children, the very youngest is usually no younger than 18 months. These children have either been living in orphanages or sometimes in certain countries with foster families. And so transferring orphanage care, institutionalized care is not ideal. A lot of the kids and can leave scars. And a lot of the kids that are being placed, depending on the country, have medically correctable or medical issues that qualify as special needs. Very often they are medically correctable, but not necessarily correctable easily in their country of birth. Another risk factor is countries closing. It doesn't happen very frequently, and generally speaking, there's a lot of rumors. The rumor mill is rife in the international adoption world. So it seldom happens completely out of the blue, but it can, and that is a risk that you have going in. Although many agencies, if they have programs in another country, will allow you just to switch to a different country if you qualify for that country. Openness is less common, but not unheard of in international adoption. Obviously, oftentimes you've got trouble finding who the birth parents are in the country, and then very often there is a language gap, but it is possible. Citizenship. The Child Citizenship Act of 2000 stated that children, internationally adopted kids coming in, have automatic citizenship once they reach the U.S. if one parent is a U.S. citizen, if the child is under 18, and if the adoption is final when the kid arrives, which is by far the most common. If it's not final, then the citizenship is automatic once the finalization happens here in the U.S. The cost of international adoption varies greatly by country, and a big factor there is the travel requirements of that country. Just to give you a rough estimate, the average cost from China, and in this case, averages actually mean something because there's less variation in costs with international. So the average cost with China is in the range of $35,000 plus a little. Ethiopia 31 to 33, something like that, thousand. Again, these are just giving you estimates because these countries may or may not be continuing. South Korea, 40 to 50,000 is the average for adopting from there. The timing depends a lot on the country. It also depends on your openness to risk factors, the age of the child, and the gender. Remember, most people want to adopt girls, so if you're open to a boy, it's almost always faster. We cover both the country-specific, in particular the country-specific timings on the Creating a Family country comparison charts. To give you just a rough feel, and the China program, and I'm going to say the China Special Needs program, there is, which is the vast majority of adoptions from China are in this program. 68% thereabouts, and again, spend less attention to the actual percentages, which can vary year by year, and focus more just on the range I'm telling you. But the last year I looked, about 68% were matched within 6 months, and the vast majority, well over 80, almost 90%, were matched within 1 year. Again, I'm going to use the same 3 countries just by way of comparison. In Ethiopia, about 60% were matched within 1 year and 70% within 2 years. Again, keep in mind that some of these countries may or may not be placing currently. South Korea, 85% were matched within 1 year and 100% were matched within 2 years. Keep in mind that just when we're speaking of South Korea, many families have to wait 1 to 1.5 years after the referral before being able to get their child. The important thing is you don't need to memorize this. If you guys are frantically taking notes at this point, stop, put your pen down, go to our website, look at the country charts. We keep those updated. That's going to have the most current information for you. So it's not important to memorize the specifics, but this gives you kind of a general idea. Now, before we finish, we need to talk about the 0.5 or the bonus type of adoption that's not an adoption, embryo donation. You hear me dancing around the words embryo donation versus embryo adoption. Technically, it should be called embryo donation because the American Society of Reproductive Medicine has asked that be the term used. However, when an agency, an adoption agency, is doing it, they often call this process embryo adoption. And in truth, there are kind of 2 different processes. There is and this is Creating a Family's generalizations coming now. There's an adoption model, and then there's a medical model. And the adoption model works through adoption agencies or agencies that are placing embryos. And they follow roughly an adoption type scenario where there is an evaluation, background checks and things like that of the would-be adoptive family or would-be family intended parents. And often if the couple that created or the person who created the embryos wants to choose or wants to specify that they want it to be a family that is religious or of a specific religion or makes over a certain amount a year or whatever, they can specify those things if they're following the adoption model. They can even choose the couple, again, in a very similar process to what's used in domestic infant, where a profile, adoptive parent profile is created, and the choosing parent, the placing parents take a look at that and make a decision. The choosing patient make a look at that and make a choice. Embryos become available for donation because they are unused embryos following infertility treatment. And the most common reason they are unused is that the patients, the infertility patient, are patients who created them, have conceived and have finished building their family, have finished creating their family, and they have frozen embryos remaining. And then they have to choose what to do with these frozen embryos. one option they can choose is to donate the embryos to another couple for family building, or another person for family building. You can the adoption model I just described. There's also the medical model, which treats this as very similar to a how you would do a normal frozen embryo transfer with oftentimes none of the process. There's the placing. The people who created the embryos do not get any choice and often don't know any information about even whether a pregnancy occurs. The receiving patient doesn't get any information or gets very little information about the couple who created the embryos. And there is little contact, little ability to share information after the fact. Where to find embryos? Well, infertility clinics. The embryos are often being stored at the clinic, being created by the patients at the clinic. And some clinics have an embryo donation program where another patient at the clinic can use, obviously with the permissions, an embryo that was created by a different couple. So that's one place that you can find. Another one, as I've alluded to earlier, is there are a few adoption agencies with embryo donation programs, and these are usually called embryo adoption programs. And there are also a couple of clinics that specialize nationwide and specialize in embryo donation as well. Or you can self-match. There are websites online that you can go to saying, and both sides, the people who have embryos that they are looking to donate as well as those who are wanting to receive a donated embryo go there and they can self-match. Keep in mind, however, that you have to be able to find a clinic who is willing to transfer the embryos. Some clinics very often will require that they will only transfer embryos that they created. So you have to go to where the embryos are to receive them. So it can get complicated, so you just need to know the rules on how to do this. Other clinics are willing to transfer embryos that were created elsewhere, and so the embryos can be shipped to you, frozen, obviously. The cost for embryo donation for the receiving family ranges anywhere from around $5,000, and that's for basically a frozen embryo transfer using the medical model from an infertility clinic. You're only usually eligible for those programs if you have already been a patient at that clinic. So that's in the low range, would be around the $5,000, all the way up to $16,000 plus. And the $16,000, the higher end, usually is when you're having more services being provided, such as home study, an evaluation of the family, as well as the ability to have ongoing information exchanged down the line. And keep in mind also that these costs are exclusive of the pregnancy cost, which fortunately is usually covered by insurance. Success rates. Well, as with all things with IVF, which is transferring an embryo that's been created for IVF, it very much depends on the age of the woman whose egg is used. Nationwide, there have been some statistics that say about the success rate for embryo donation is about 40%. And that actually is interesting. It's slightly higher than the national average, and that, I believe, is because the more often embryos that are donated to another couple more often have been created using a donor egg and or donor sperm. But in particular, when we're talking about success rates, it matters if they have, because the donors for eggs tend to be quite young and their fertility is quite high. So I think that probably argues why the success rate is slightly greater. The timing for embryo donation is really difficult to predict. And there's just not a lot of programs. So the best thing to do is to contact the agencies or the clinic where you have been a patient. Check with them, find out what their timing is, or contact one of the agencies and find out what their timing is. Openness is an option most often with the adoption model and is not an option with the medical model. And that includes even sharing such things as sharing medical information. If, let's say, that the woman whose egg was used to create the embryo later develops breast cancer and it's BRCA connected, related, she might want to let the family who used donated embryo know. And that could fall into the openness and the ability to do that, where when using the medical model, that's seldom an option. When using the adoption model, it can be an option. You need to check with the agency to see if it is. I wanted to touch very briefly on two special communities that we get questions from, and that's the LGBTQ community as well as single parents, and I'm just going to kind of touch briefly on that. For the LGBTQ community, with domestic infant adoption, it is the parent or birth mother or expectant mom choice. And interestingly, or I guess not surprisingly, as societal attitudes have shifted, so has the willingness of expectant moms to choose same-sex families. Truthfully, people who identify as transgender are still having a harder time being chosen. In foster care adoption, most states actively welcome same-sex families. There is some prejudice that remains, but that's shifting pretty quickly. Again, transgender parents face more difficulty. In international adoption, all the major placing countries will not place with open members of the LGBTQ community. With with embryo donation, it really depends on the agency and the clinic. Many, but not all, agencies who have embryo adoption programs are religious-based, and most will not place with LGBTQ families. All right, so single parents, domestic infant. What we have seen at Creating a Family is, generally speaking, we see single parents have a harder time being chosen by expectant parents. In foster care adoption, single parents are welcome. In fact, 26% of all adoptions from foster care are by single moms and 3% are by single dads. In international adoption, it depends on the country, but generally speaking, it is not easy, and they will often only place children that are harder to place, so children with greater special needs. With embryo donation, it depends on the agency or the clinic. Again, many, but not all, agencies are religious-based, and many will not place with single women or with single men who are using a surrogate. I hope that this information, this introduction to adoption has been helpful for you and has provided more information on your journey. And remember, we have a lot more information at our website, creatingafamily.org, and our Adopt Ed Center for parents that can help you learn more specifics that are directly applicable. Thanks for joining us. I want to take a moment now to thank another one of our partners whose generosity allows us to bring you this show, and that is Spence Chapin. They are a licensed and accredited nonprofit organization in the New York City metro area, and they have been offering adoption services for more than 100 years. Wow. They have a robust, and I do mean robust, post-adoption service center providing birth parents, adoptive parents, and adoptees a supportive community and a connection of professionals who understand the unique aspects of adoption. And that is truly something to consider when choosing an agency, is making certain you find one that provides services in the long term, because adoption is lifelong, not just a short term. Thank you for being with us today, and if you have a moment, hey, do us a favor. Give us a quick rating on iTunes. We would really appreciate it, and I would personally really appreciate it. So if you would pop over to iTunes right now and give us either a star rating, or if you're really feeling generous, give us a written comment. That would be great as well. Thanks for joining us. and I will see you again next week.
Your hands were made for greatness. Mighty hands for painting, paneling, and clicking the submit order button on HomeDepot.com to get that duvet. And these Egyptian cotton towels delivered right to your door. Do more with decor at the Home Depot. Save up to 30% on select bedding and bath. Now at HomeDepot.com. More saving, more kinds of doing. Valid on select items online only. Free delivery on select items $45 or more. Enter promo code BEDBATH15 at purchase for an extra 15% off. Visit HomeDepot.com for more information.
Come to the Home Depot this month and you'll learn a thing or two. Actually, 3, with 3 free do-it-yourself workshops. Learn how to design and care for your container garden by selecting the best soil and aesthetically arranging your plants. Learn how to install tile flooring, even how to keep your outdoor deck and patio space in the best shape possible. See, it's never too late to learn something new. Register today at HomeDepot.com/workshops for a do-it-yourself workshop near you. Only at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing.